Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another incredible edition of the Color of Science Digital Edition, where we bring you amazing people to have conversations around in the science, technology, engineering, and math space. Let me begin, of course, by sharing my screen. I'm going through some of the housekeeping. All right. So as always, programs are made possible by generous sponsors. So I really want to thank our presenting sponsor, Battelle and L Brands, also the lead funder, the Curtis T. and Beverly Jewell Foundation, additional support from CAS, Honda, and KeyBank. And of course, it's brought to you in partnership with the Garvey Institute. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Frederick Burley. I have the pleasure of being the president and CEO of the Center of Science and Industry, otherwise affectionately known as COSI, here in Columbus, Ohio. And as you know, we bring incredible people every time to chat with you, and today is no exception. I'm gonna dig right into the introduction of today's guest speaker. I gotta pull out the paper because her CV is so packed. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to meet Dr. Swati Mohan. She joined NASA Jet Propulsion Lab first in 2004 after completing her bachelor's in science from Cornell University in mechanical and aerospace engineering. After working as a systems engineer on Cassini during Saturn orbit insertion and Hygiene's probe release, she returned to graduate school in 2005 to MIT to get her master's and PhD in aeronautics, astronautics, and space systems through the Space Systems Laboratory. She then returned to JPL in 2010, and since then has worked on multiple missions such as Grail and OCO3. But for the last year, and this is the coolest thing, ladies and gentlemen, for the last year, Dr. Mohan's role was the Mars 2020 Guidance, Navigation, and Controls Operation Lead. Yes, Dr. Mohan was the mission commentator for the landing of the famous Perseverance rover on February 18th, 2022. Now, I really enjoy hosting the Color of Science Digital Edition, but that is not even close to actually being the commentator for landing Perseverance on Mars. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Swati Mohan. She will now pair and share her screen.
Hi, Dr. B. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be able to talk to everyone here.
Absolutely our pleasure. Take it away.
Share my screen here. All right, so this first introductory asked me to just give a little bit of background on how I got to where I am and maybe some of the life lessons that I've kind of learned on the way looking back. So just to recap for my bio, and more importantly, the aspects of that I identify with myself. So as Dr. B said, I am a guidance, navigation, and controls operations lead for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory's Mars 2020 Perseverance mission. What this means in layman's terms is that I'm a rocket scientist. More accurately, I am an engineer and lifelong space nerd and aficionado. I am Indian American, so I was born in India and raised in America. And I'm a wife and mother. I have 2 little girls at home and try to balance, working in space and being grounded here on Earth with my kiddos and my husband. So the 3 biggest lessons that I've kind of put together looking back on my career so far is first, knowing and accepting who you are. Second, creating your support system. And third, to actively do your best. And I'll go into these a little bit by giving you a pictorial journey through my career and how these 3 aspects really helped me get to where I am today. So the first one, knowing and accepting who you are. So how did I get from this little Indian girl to being at JPL today? So I grew up wanting to be a pediatrician. That was a very easy career for a child to understand. You go to the doctor, they make you feel better, and isn't that a noble profession to make people feel better? And someone had asked me when I was 7 or 8, and I was like, oh, well, I know about this, so I'm going to say I'm going to be that. And once it once I said it, I felt like that was it. I had committed my entire life at the age of 7 to being a pediatrician without any real knowledge of what that entailed. On the side, growing up, I loved everything about space. I first got into it watching Star Trek, and the images that were in Star Trek about space and the concept that there was places out there that we fundamentally didn't know how they worked or how they were created or what they were about just really piqued my interest. And the images from like the Hubble Space Telescope of, you know, galaxies and star formations in Europa just really caught my interest. But that's all it was for a very, very long time. It was just an interest, a hobby, you know, books that I read on the side when I was being scolded not to go do my homework. It wasn't until I got to high school and I took my first physics class. I had the benefit of a really great teacher, and he made it easy for me to understand. It really clicked that once you knew F equals ma, that was it. That was all you need to know to derive everything else. And I had to make a choice in high school whether I was going to go into biology and or physics at the AP level because they were offered at the same time. And this was the first time that I really had to dig deep and think about not just what I thought I should do because of what I had said in the past, but what was I really good at and what was I really interested in. You know, the medicine aspect and the biology, I hated the memorization of biology. I couldn't stand the dissections. The chemistry didn't come easy to me at all. I spent hours and hours just trying to get a decent grade, much less a good one. But in physics, it kind of all clicked. So I naturally understood it, and it was easy for me to keep up with the concepts. And it helped to have a teacher who was really great to tie what physics was to engineering and how it might apply to space. So that's kind of where I made a right turn and said, okay, I'm gonna I'm not gonna go into medicine, which was a really hard decision because all of my friends were in the bio classes, and I was the only girl really in the physics class or in the computer science classes. But I made that decision to uh, look at what I was really good at and interested in, as opposed to what I thought I should do or what was more commonly accepted. So after that, I kind of went gung ho into trying to figure out how to go into space engineering. I went to space camp. I went did internships at NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center. I chose a university that had a really broad depth in space from the science and the engineering aspects of it. And then while I was at school, I majored in mechanical and aerospace engineering, and I tried to use that time in undergrad to really explore all of what the aerospace industry could give us. So that meant undergraduate research in satellite design build. I did internships at Kennedy Space Center in space biology. I did internships at JPL, both in the TMAX concept formulation of new missions, as well as like geology science. And then in looking at all the stuff that I'd explored during undergraduate, I decided that I liked the satellite design build and the control systems that I got to work on the best. So I went to MIT Space Systems Lab for my graduate degree, and I worked on a project called Spheres, which is a set of 3 formation flown little satellites inside the International Space Station. If you've ever seen Star Wars and that scene where Luke is practicing with the droid and he has to, you know, fire the bolts, that's the inspiration. These satellites look very much like that little droid that was helping Luke Skywalker practice his lightsaber. Worked on it for my entire PhD, which was an incredible experience because I got to work with data from space. I got to go to Houston to train the astronauts. I really experienced the whole life cycle of a project, really compressed in the formulation of a concept or a science to experiment, the implementation on the ground and testing of it, the implementation and execution in space, getting the data back, and figuring out what went right, what didn't went right, and then repeating that process again. So I graduated from MIT in 2010 with my PhD and came straight back to JPL. At JPL, I've worked on a bunch of different things. Cassini, when I was in between undergraduate and graduate school, I worked on Grail as a navigation analyst, which was cool because it's a first mission that flew in formation around another planetary body. I worked on a couple other missions like Optiques, OCO3, and then for the last 8 years, I've been on Mars 2020 from almost the inception of Mars 2020 through to the past landing day and a couple of weeks after that for the initial conception. So that time in undergraduate and graduate to really figure out what my niche was and what my interests and skills were really helped me to find a niche in the space industry that suited me the best. I had to be honest with myself that I was better at applying than memorizing, being able to be true, picking the physics over biology. I realized through my internships that I liked to build things. That's why I ventured more into engineering than in science, even though the science is what motivates me. And then I had a passion for the exploration portion of it. So I really wanted to do something that went beyond Earth to go to new worlds, which is what JPL is best known for. And then finally, I like being able to see the big picture and then drilling deep and how things connect on multiple levels, which is exactly what system engineering does. So all of these little pieces, these little stepping stones, a week internship here, a choice 10 years ago, all of these are building blocks in figuring out who you are and accepting that. And once you can piece all of those things together of knowing who you are, you can use those to find the right niche for yourself in picking where you can best do your career. And when you compare what you're really interested in with what you're really good at, it sets you up really well for success. No matter how well you set yourself up, you need a support system because no man is an island. I had the benefit of having a wonderful family that I was born into. My parents were both in the STEM field, and they really encouraged education in STEM above all else. When I went to Cornell, I found other like-minded friends that I really bonded with that had the same ambitions and passions. And then finally in graduate school, I found friends, colleagues in my field of work. And, being a woman in controls engineering you're still a minority for the most part. So in graduate school, I happened to have these set of friends. We joined at the same time, and having that bond with others who are in the similar situation really helped to soldier us through it and give us that support that we needed to bond and make sure we got through the PhD. And we're still really close to this day. And then finally, my support at home, my husband, my in-laws and family would not have been able to get through the last 8-10 years without them. My husband especially being this other half of me to balance out when I need to be on call and in mission control. He was taking care of things at home, and it takes that balance to be able to both have a life and have a career. And then finally, my work family. I love this picture because it's from Halloween at work, and we're all doing work, but you can see the comfort that we have with each other and the dressing up. And everyone was the Mars 2020, especially the landing crew, was so diverse and so accepting of everyone that we really bonded as a family because we were so open and aware of each other and really wanting to listen to anyone, that it really formed this really tight-knit group. So creating your support system, my family was always supporting and encouraging. I know that's definitely different for different people. Friends that understand and really help motivate you and to encourage you, not to bring you down. Those are the support systems we make for ourselves and our partners that we choose in life. And then the work family, who you work with day in and day out, and can you trust them? And really, with that trust comes the equal partnership and being able to rely to get the tight knit group in order to achieve the success. And then finally, the third aspect, to actively do your best. You can know what you want to do, you can have the encouragement, but it takes that initiative to be able to go out. Opportunities aren't always visible clearly to you, and sometimes it takes you creating them, to asking about them, to help move you forward to the next step. When I was an intern at Goddard, my actual internship was, coding some CAD diagrams, but there happened to be a model rocket competition going on at Goddard. So the other interns and I asked our mentor, can we participate? We didn't necessarily expect him to say yes or no, but just asking, he was all excited about it and actually like mentored us and taught us how to use some of the facilities at Goddard to create like nose cones, and taught us aerodynamics, and just that one initiative of asking about it and bringing that to him kind of spurred this whole other project that was honestly more interesting and educational than the actual internship that they had originally designed. In undergrad, I would seek out opportunities to present at conferences. This wasn't really expected of undergrads, and my undergraduate advisors were like, I guess you could if you really wanted to, because those expectations I only really had for the graduate students. But just that experience for me of putting something together, to be able to explain it, to stand up and explain it, gave me the skills and a chance to practice when it wasn't as critical to my job in undergrad. And then having that on my resume showed future hires that I could do that I was able to have that level of depth to present. When in college, a conversation with one of the astronauts that I was training in Houston led to this whole robotics challenge program. When I was in grad school, based on the conversation that we had, we kind of did a pilot program. We're like, okay, what if we get two schools and see how we can use the spheres to not just reach the graduate lab, my graduate lab, but a broader base. So everything that I did for this was not in my PhD thesis at all, but we kind of worked together with some people and did a pilot program with the astronaut when he was in space of how to get that going. After I left, it just blossomed to this whole competition that became multinational, multiple age levels in school, to give students the opportunity to code on um, actual satellites inside the space station. So, and it all started from a conversation over dinner at a Mexican restaurant with this astronaut. So just that, that thinking outside the box and taking the initiative to see what if, can lead to such wonderful things. And then finally, at JPL, with a colleague of mine, founded my own lab called the Small Satellite Dynamics Testbed. When we got to JPL after a PhD, we had seen that JPL was trying to break into the small sat community, but they'd traditionally done large missions. So it takes a little bit of a paradigm shift. And having come from grad school that does a lot of more of those small satellites, my colleague and I decided to try to pitch this lab to bring some of that paradigm into JPL. And it took a lot of talking to people, to pitching, to selling. But after we were able to convince it, we built this lab and now provide a service to those small satellite projects on lab. And it really came out of the brainchild of me and one of my colleagues sitting together thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had this? That opportunity or that initiative is one of the steps of actively doing your best, seeing the need, seeing the opportunity that you want, or seeing something that you want to do and figuring out a way to make it happen, even if that opportunity is not clearly spelled out in like a job rec or a position or a call. So creating the opportunities, networking, you'd be surprised at how many things happen because you talk to people or people remember. And then use each opportunity to learn, to experience, and to figure out more about yourself, of what you like or don't like, or what you're good at and don't look at, don't what you're good at and not good at, in order to keep an eye on where you might find your niche. So that's kind of my three big lessons learned, knowing and accepting who you are, creating your support system, and then actively doing your best. And looking back, those were the three things that I think helped me get to where I am. And then the last big thing is to not give up. It takes perseverance to get to anywhere you are, and we learn way more from our failures than from our successes. So each activity, each experience is a possibility for growth and brings you closer to your goals, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like it at the time. And just to do a little bit of picture show, these are a few pictures from launch of 2020, landing, and then a particular high point where I actually got to talk to President Biden a couple weeks after the landing when he was congratulating the whole team on a successful mission. A very interesting point in my career that I had never expected. So kind of wanted to highlight of how I got to where I am at that point. And I guess with that, I will stop sharing and take any questions maybe from you, Dr. B.
Absolutely. First of all, Dr. Mohan, unbelievable presentation. What an illustrious career. I can go in so many directions. I'm going to begin where you ended. Um, Tell us about talking to the President of the United States. How is that? And by the way, I'm obviously a fan of academics and scholarship and the work you do. I'm also a sports fan, right? And so I follow football. And yes, when the NFL team wins the Super Bowl, they get invited to the White House. Okay, that's kind of cool. But you were talking to the President of the United States as the person who controlled the rover mission Perseverance to Mars. What was that conversation like?
So I will say, I think I was way more nervous about talking to the president than I was on landing day. Like on landing day, there was so many things to focus on that you can, you knew what you had to look at, you knew what you had to focus on. But when we had the call with the president, I got there early and I was checking the sound, and then it was just dead silence in the room, waiting for him to come, and my knees were just knocking, and I had my little note card of, because they're like, okay, he might ask you a question, so make sure you have like 2 sentences written down of or so what you're gonna say. So I had my little note card kind of shaking, and he was just phenomenal and so complimentary and casual with the team and sincere in what he was saying, that it was really an honor to speak with him. And I think it really meant a lot to all of us at JPL that he took the effort to do that. We live streamed it. There was the 2020 team was in mission control, but it was live streamed to all of JPL at the same time. So the message really had wider implications for us, because it'd been such a hard year, just getting to that point and keeping the motivation up to get to that point, that it was a kind of sweet treat at the end.
You got it. Well, first of all, congratulations on a successful mission, and congratulations on meeting the President of the United States. And it sounds like President Biden is as Joe Cool as the media makes him out to be. So that is awesome. Folks, you're listening to the Color of Science Digital Edition, brought to you by COSI Connects Live, where we bring to you a universe of science. We are interviewing none other than Dr. Swati Mohan, an incredible engineer, astrophysicist, aeronautical engineer, NASA jet propulsion expert. I'm going to ask you some questions, but part of the show is we have a lot of questions submitted by people, a lot of kids and some adults. I'll get to those, and then I will take some questions that come through live in the chat. So my first few questions are, and again, there's so many areas I can go, but I'm going to jump right into, for the last 10 years, you worked at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And now you serve as the supervisor for the guidance navigation. You talked a little bit about that. But what is the average day of an engineer, and in your case, a NASA engineer? Like morning to night, what's an average day in your work?
Yeah, so an average day really, really depends on your job and what stage of the mission that you're at, right? So in the early stages of the mission, when you're still dealing with mostly like paper and requirements, for me, it was a lot of meetings, a lot of talking to people. As a system engineer, part of my job is to connect all the different pieces. So it involved, talking to this person and understanding what they were saying, and then translating that to this person, so that when you actually connected the hardware, they actually connected because both sides understood what they needed to do. Later in the mission, when we started to actually build and test the hardware, for me, because I was one of the ones actually testing, it became a lot of shift work. So my day was no longer 9 to 5. It was determined by, when I had to be in the test bed and when I had to be in Atlo. And that could be anywhere where Monday I was doing 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then Tuesday I was doing 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. And then maybe Wednesday I drew the really short stick and I had to be 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., but then maybe took Thursday off. And it was that kind of up and down and really variable, and then interspersed with the other meetings, because you still have to get your, day job-ish done when you're still testing. and that kind of continued on once we got into Atlo, which is when we actually build the vehicle. That was kind of similar. There'd be spurts where they would run, tests that I was responsible for. So those days would be, higher lows. I would be in that mission control, working with the operators. Once we got to launch, our schedules were kind of dictated by the deep space network passes, the communication opportunities that we had with the vehicle. And we had to get X number of things done in a particular order and with different constraints before, landing day. So we're like, okay, we have these passes, your shift is here. So I was going off and on between shifts of actually sitting in mission control to monitoring mission control because I was the lead. So I had folks in there and I had to schedule who was going in when to support these different activities. And then some aspect was being on call for like 2 years straight, where I wasn't always had to have my phone on me because at any time I may get a call from either people testing the test bed and something going wrong, or people testing an Atlo and something going wrong, or people testing with the vehicle when it was in space and something going wrong. So that's kind of how the normal day went. I'm back to 9 to 5 and mostly meetings now. So
I'm really glad you shared all that. I mean, there are many aspects of the color science. Fundamentally, to showcase the amazing men and women and the diversity that makes up this field called science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, right? So that's one thing we do. But the other piece we want to do is we want to motivate, and not just motivate, but get a wide audience, not just K through 12, but even adults, to understand the depth and complexity of certain jobs. And I love what you said, because you're on paper as an engineer. And right away we stereotype and think it means this kind of job. But you just outlined everything from a lot of reading and writing and paperwork and applications to some desk type stuff to actually being an engineer and being hands-on technology to then, communication and all those skills and running meetings, that leadership. I mean, your quote unquote title of an engineer really unpacks a diverse set of skill sets. And I love that. And it's so inspirational to people out there because you can still be true to you and you can still have many opportunities even if you pick a profession, which is great. So, and to that, one of your coolest things, and I talked about this in the intro, is you were the mission commentator for the Mars rover landing this past February. Okay, so first of all, ladies and gentlemen, that's just completely cool. But what is that responsibility? Like, are you like doing a play-by-play on the commentary? And more importantly, what's the training for that like?
So I was the mission commentator. So my job was to translate what was happening into everyday speak so everybody could understand it. So what you may not have heard, and you could probably go back and find the raw footage of this, that the entire EDL team, the entire entry, descent, and landing team was actually doing the technical play-by-play. So we had assigned, because so many things happen so fast, we had assigned different people responsibilities of what they were supposed to look for and then what they were going to call out based on that. So I had a spreadsheet of all the different things that were supposed to happen, what the calls looked like, and who was doing that call. So in one ear, I had the whole landing team, saying all these terms, and they were all shorthand, right? So not all acronyms, shorthand, something that only most of the team, to the large extent, just the landing team would really understand. And then as soon as I heard that, my job was to be able to translate that into like colloquial talk of what was actually happening. In terms of
And you're
training,
doing that in real time.
And I'm doing that in real time while I have like 4 displays up, because we have like multiple different ways of how we're viewing data as it comes from the Perseverance landing. So we had one which was tones. So just we have a screen of it just pop up like a phrase as something happens, and then and that kind of cut off in the middle of landing. And then we had another one which was actual raw telemetry. So it was fed into simulation where I could actually see like speeds that it was going and altitude and like a little visualization. And then on another screen, we had actual Doppler pings from the Deep Space Network to the vehicle. And those are like dots on a scatter plot that meant something. So we had all these going on, plus, so I was watching all of those, plus the, voices in my ear of what was actually happening. But we did practice. So we had 3 to 4 practices of the landing scenario, both in with two or so where we did, run of the mill. This is exactly what we're expecting to happen. And then we even had one that we had little gremlins, engineers in the back that were like tweaking things so that the data looked off to us, so that it would practice our ability to say, to be able to call out, when things weren't going right. So I had the unfortunate job of, if stuff wasn't going right, I had this whole spreadsheet, especially to do that touchdown call. We had three things that we were waiting to hear whether it was touchdown successfully. The rover had to be on the ground, it had to still be talking to us, and it had to be stationary. Like, we didn't want it to be on the ground and like sliding down a hill or something like that. So three calls, and that was the novel. If we got all those three calls, we were going to call touchdown. And I had this huge flow chart. What if we only get one call? What if we only get this one? What if we only get that one? What if we only this? What are you going to say in this scenario? What are you going to say in that scenario? When do I just shut up and let like the big project managers, take over? And we were going back and forth of what they were, even like 2 hours before landing, which was a little stressful for me. But
that's super awesome. So related to that, what parts of the mission were most nerve-wracking to you as an engineer, and also as the lead commentator?
I think landing day itself was stressful. The week leading up to landing day, everything was really going pretty smoothly, but our paranoia level was just growing exponentially. Every day we were just more and more on edge, and like thinking about all these minute things that we knew about, but they were so low risk. We're like, wait, are we sure? Are we sure that we, handled that one little thing? Go back and check all the documentation to make sure you handle that one thing. So I think we may have done it to ourselves. Like, it was just progressively getting more and more nerve-wracking. I will say there was another point during cruise that was a little nerve-wracking to me, because it was on me. So I was responsible for one of these activities called the IMU calibration. And as part of this activity, we have to do very large turns of the vehicle. Like, we literally have to change it from here to here and back again. So these were the biggest maneuvers that we were going to make on the vehicle. And every time you turn, if something goes wrong and you go slightly out of bounds, you risk, not being able to get enough sun on the solar rays, not being able to be in good communication. So I had a little bit of and this was my activity. So I had coded the sequences, I had set up the whole activity and was supposed to know everything that was going to happen and what was going on. And there was multiple checks and balances and part of getting that sequence built. But just before we sent that final, just after we sent the final command to kick off that sequence, I had a momentary like, oh my gosh, we're actually doing this. I really, really hope that I didn't screw up.
Wow.
And thankfully it all went really smoothly, and it was a success. But it was that, that was one moment where I really felt the gravity of what we were doing, and right, the implications of, any small issue and what they could have for the spacecraft.
I love that. And make no mistake, Dr. Mohan, that pun about when you really felt the gravity was not lost on us here at COSI. Landing a rover on Moon, speaking of gravity, on Mars, sorry. All right, so my last question, because we do got a bunch of questions from our guests, and I want to make sure I get to those. But my last question, again, a lot of this color science theories around mentorship and leadership and that kind of stuff. And so what advice would you have for young girls and frankly boys who are watching today, who may dream of working at NASA, but may not see themselves as a scientist or astronaut yet?
I will say that there are so many different ways to contribute to the aerospace industry. It takes all sorts of people and experiences and disciplines to make these large technological missions come to light, that uh, you really should form your own path. There's not just one path to get to a particular discipline. We have people at JPL who went into politics and, through the organization of political campaigns, decided that they wanted to shift that and do those organizations for space missions. We've you had people who've been Rockettes on Broadway and come back to the space industry. We've had artists and graphic designers and programmers and technicians and welders, all different levels, and writers, and the journalists too who work in the aerospace industry who helped with the project, right? So it takes so many different disciplines that I think you should find your passion and what you're good at first, and then see how you can apply that to the space industry. Don't try to find a discipline because you think that's your best shot at supporting space. Find what really motivates you and what you're good at first, and then try to find how to contribute that to the space industry. Because there's so many ways that you can contribute. There's all sorts of paths that you can take that I'm sure for most disciplines, there's a way that you can find to bring both of those together. And then by doing that, you're really following both of your dreams, right? Your passion and what you're good at, and you're following your own path, which is the best way to set yourself up for success, and instead of trying to follow someone else's. And then I guess one aspect of that, explore, right? There's so many opportunities for talking to people at NASA, for mentors, for internships. So if you don't quite know what you want to do, use those opportunities, especially when you're still a student, to be able to explore those different areas, because there's so many different areas before you commit to one.
That's fantastic. And that really resonates with your 3 points earlier in your presentation about keys to success. All right, folks, you're listening to the Color of Science Digital Edition. I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Swati Mohan, an incredible astrophysicist, aeronautical engineer, space engineer. I'm giving you all kinds of titles, but you've earned them all through your illustrious career. This part of the show is one of my favorite, where we go to questions that were submitted in advance. And then I see some questions in the chat. I'll get to those as well. So not everybody gives their age, but those who do, I will give it to you. So the first one is from Adeline. Adeline is age 7, and she asked simply, how did it land on Mars?
It landed on Mars through a very, very set of complicated engineering, which is sort of like Russian dolls, where you have a bigger one and you have it all stacked. So we had the little rover as the smallest Russian doll. And then around it, we had all these different engineering pieces that helped it get to the ground safely. So the first part was a cruise stage, which helped it get from Earth to Mars. The second was a heat shield, which helped it slow down once it hit the top of the Martian atmosphere. And then we used a parachute to slow it down even further. We got rid of the parachute and the heat shield, and then we used this big jetpack, which is a series of engines to slow it down even further, and then a set of ropes, basically of bridles, to lower it from the jetpack down onto the surface of Mars.
Very cool. So a bunch of different phases and stages to get that to land gently, soft landing on Mars. Very cool. All right, next up is Gabriel. Gabriel is 9, and Gabriel wants to know, where on Mars is the rover exploring?
Perseverance is exploring Jezero Crater, which is on Mars.
Can you repeat that slowly? Is moving where?
Perseverance landed at Jezero Crater, which we believe is an ancient lake bed on Mars. So the features in Jezero Crater have this nice river delta that kind of flows into Jezero Crater, which we think was an ancient lake bed. And the reason Perseverance went there is because Perseverance's mission is to seek the signs of past life. And where there was water, there is potentially the possibility for life, especially in the lake bed and the river delta has the opportunity for preserving the signs of those that past life. So Perseverance landed about a few kilometers just south of the river delta rim into that crater, and is kind of meandering upwards, and eventually will hopefully get up that river delta and be able to sample through that area.
Got it. Very cool. Okay, moving up in age, Savannah, age 12, wants to know, and this is really perfect for the follow-up to what you just answered, how do we know if there could be life on Mars?
So the short answer is we don't know for sure, Perseverance has a lot of instruments that can do a lot of detailed, like microscopy and spectroscopy. And so looking at very, very fine detail into the rocks and seeing what they're made of, not just the rocks themselves, potentially anything on it. But the biggest thing is that Perseverance has the ability to collect samples, and hopefully those samples will one day be brought back to Earth. And when they're brought back to Earth, then we can unleash the full scientific arsenal on Earth to explore those samples in earnest. And it's really only once they come back and we can process them in so many different ways that we would really be able to tell whether or not there was life in those samples or not.
So that's very interesting. You have to explain for the audience, how are those samples? Because these are real samples. This is not like a digital image. These are like physical samples. So the rover, is my understanding, land on Mars, is going to have a half-life. It's going to roll around Mars for hopefully as long as it can. But how do the samples get back? There's no subway system or little jet plane, the conveyor belt from Mars back to Earth. So how do these samples get back to you and your colleagues to actually test?
So there's basically needs to be follow-on missions to go get those samples. So the current idea is that there will be another mission that will land on Mars, retrieve those samples. It will have to put it in a rocket called the Mars Ascent Vehicle that will launch those samples into space from Mars, which would be the first time we've ever tried to launch something from another planet. And then another mission would have to go grab those samples from orbit in Mars and then come back to Earth and then drop those samples so that they get from Earth orbit back down to the ground.
Well, there's this guy named Jeff Bezos who's revolutionized how to ship packages. Maybe you should speak to the folks at Amazon. Just kidding. It's not a plug for Amazon, but that's really cool. And the moral of that story, though, for you listeners, especially younger folks, think of all the job opportunities you can have. We're talking about launching something for the first time from Mars, and it goes into space. A second mission to grab it, as Dr. Mohan does, a whole set of other people and skill sets, and then bring it down to Earth. So what a career opportunity.
Absolutely. Years from now, that's what the kids who are 8, 9, 12 right now, that's what they could be working on, actually handling the samples that have come back from Mars, hopefully.
So cool. That is so cool. Okay, we got Sam H. Sam H is age 16 years old. Sam wants to know, what was the control room like after you safely landed rover on Mars?
Jubilant, exhilarated, extremely relieved, and a little bit awestruck, I think.
Very cool. I can only imagine. Was it super noisy? Was it like you won the Super Bowl, or was it like, oh my God, we're excited, but that was the weirdest, coolest thing ever, but kind of a quiet piece?
So we were told in no certain terms that until I said the touchdown confirmed, nobody was allowed to cheer or show any emotion. Okay. So after I said the touchdown confirmed, everyone broke out into cheers, and it kind of peaked. And then a couple of minutes later, we got the first image from the rover, and that's when there was another peak. And then I think it kind of died down, and we were still just shocked, I think, and awestruck that it actually happened. There was a press conference an hour or two afterwards, so most of us from the mission control staggered upstairs, and we were watching from the EDL landing room, and it was just still, shocked. When we later that evening or early the next morning, we got some of the pictures down from entry, descent, and landing, and those are the first time we'd actually had pictures from landing. None of the 4 previous missions had imagery during landing. So when we saw that first image of the parachute deploy, our first image from the parachute deploy, and then the picture of the rover and the jetpack, that was just amazing. We always knew how it would work, but we'd always seen it as ones and zeros on a screen, and to see it as an image, that was just incredible.
Very cool. Very, very cool. All right, Rosalind, who's 17 years old. Rosalind wants to know, what is the biggest challenge that you face socially as a woman in engineering, and how did you overcome it?
So I would say the biggest challenge I faced socially as a woman in engineering was being comfortable being the only woman in the room for most of my career. And what that lended to was having to be more outspoken, more vocal than I think my personality would have naturally been, just to keep reaffirming that I had the seat at the table. And sometimes that literally meant sitting at the table with the head honchos instead of, sitting against the wall in a conference room. Sometimes that meant, speaking up to just, reiterate a point just to make my voice heard. Sometimes that meant yelling at people when I was trying to give a presentation because they were trying to talk over me and they didn't know what they were talking about.
I will
Which is
let them know,
very,
Dr. Mohan, that you're not having that. That I know.
but it's very hard to do, right? And especially when you're the only woman or the only person like you in the room, being able to put yourself out there is extremely difficult, and it's a conscious effort that you have to do over and over and over again. Um, so I hope
Got it.
that.
Awesome. So Pariksith didn't give their name, but I'm assuming they're young based on the question. And they're saying Pariksith is saying, I'm very much interested in space. What kind of career should I choose to be part of NASA? And I know you talked about it a little bit, but I just wanted to read the question. And I love this line. I really want to plan ahead.
Like I said, there are so many different careers you can choose at NASA. Everything from being a graphic designer to a computer programmer to an astronaut to a physician, to an artist, to an engineer or a welder or a journalist. There's so to being a teacher, an educator. Also, like there's just so many different paths that I think first you need to decide what you want to do and then see how you can do that in NASA.
Okay, that's great. Well, and Akil and Diswari, if you're listening, the good doctor just answered what were the first steps that should be. So thanks for answering that too. I'm going to jump to some of the questions here that are coming in on in live stream. First of all, we have one. This is, hi, Dr. Mohan. Thank you for making the time to share your story with kids and adults. I really appreciated your point about exploring what one is good at, like doing versus not. As a parent, one of the moments we face is when to encourage kids to persevere when there are setbacks versus when to let them accept that it's not their strength and move on to another area. Could you share your perspective on when you experienced setbacks and how you responded? Thanks again. And I do want to say this question is from Dr. Sumithira Vasu, who is a dear colleague and supporter of COSI and an amazing engineer and accomplished computer scientist herself. So again, the crux of the question is what, from your perspective, would you say how kiddos should deal with setbacks and how you responded in the case when you had setbacks in your life?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm somewhat going through the same thing right now with my daughters, who, especially with my 10-year-old, who's trying to explore and figure out these different career opportunities or what she's passionate about. I think the the setbacks, there's some aspect to helping them to learn what it was about it that didn't go the way they wanted, right? So there's whether there's some aspect of luck, some things that you can't control, one of the or factors outside your control. One of the things that was a huge setback when I was growing up was that I didn't get into the science and tech magnet school that I wanted to. My big sister had gotten into it. My little cousins had all gotten into it. I was the only one from my family who didn't get into it. And that kind of branded me like, if I can't even get into science high school, like how am I supposed to get into a college, and go into this field? But I had to push through to saying, okay, I didn't go there, but that doesn't mean I'm not capable. And that's the part where you have to help them to believe in themselves. And then I went through the series of, if I was there, I would have gotten these opportunities. So I need to make those for myself. And I went through and say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And in the end, it probably was a good thing because I ended up being the big fish in a smaller pond, so to speak, as opposed to being the small fish in a really big pond. And there's benefits to that, right? Like the recommendations from the teachers, the ability when you're always compared at some set to your colleagues, and the comparison became easier because I wasn't compared against like super geniuses at the science tech school.
Mhm.
Um, and then that's the motivational part. Like it was out of their control. Sometimes bad things happen from that, but don't let that drive you, or don't let that demotivate you in your goal, because that decision fundamentally wasn't in your control. So the other aspect of, okay, did you try your hardest and not achieve this? So did you like practice, or did you study? And there's some aspects of like, if you knew you could have practiced more, or you knew you could have done, maybe you try a different way of studying, and then that might help you. Or you really evaluate if you really did put in everything and you still didn't get decent. And that's one of the examples where I gave, in picking physics versus biology. I would really give it my all for biology, but the memorization would just take me so long, and it was so arduous. And even then, by the time I got to the test, like I would only do in my criteria, okay, right? Whereas I would do this and I could study for like a tenth of the time and get, equivalent results, right? So that's where you have to be true to yourself and say, okay, how much bang are you getting for the buck that you're putting in here versus here, and the ease at which it comes to reach a certain level. And those conversations are not easy, right? Because you may really want this thing, but you're just not set up, to do it. It's like not everyone can be, a petite for a gymnast, or have a runner's body, or things like that. No matter how much you try, you can't get over certain capabilities, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but as long as you can reframe what your idea of success or career is to work with your strengths.
I love that answer, and we won't call out any school names, but the science and tech magnet school that you didn't get into now has the shame to say the person who led the landing of Perseverance on Mars, we didn't think she could make our cut. Clearly, they didn't know what we're talking about. But more importantly, to what you also said at the beginning of the conversation, this idea of failure, it's okay as long as you learn from it and it motivates and you pivot and you move forward. So thank you for that question, Doc, and thank you for that answer, Doc. All right, I'm going to go to, and we're getting close to the tail of the program, but I want to squeak through a couple more questions. This one is from Ashley N. Why did you go into engineering rather than try to become an astronaut? Would you ever have gone into space yourself?
I cannot be an astronaut. My eyesight is just not good enough. Even with surgery or whatnot, I wouldn't have qualified. So that was the biggest reason. The second one was when I was in grad school, I had the opportunity to work with the astronauts. Like I helped to write some of the procedures that they had to follow to train on the experiment that we were running. So I got a little bit of a sense of how um, how their day went and like what they had to do. And it was cool, to be up in space and to run the experiments. There was a lot of people telling them exactly what they needed to do, and then
Got it.
followed by peaks of your life is on the line, so you better be able to like think fast. And that part of it wasn't for me. I liked the building of it and like being able to tell others how to do it as opposed to doing someone else's experiment.
Got it. Got it. Fair. All right. Two more quick questions. So this is from Sam on Facebook. And you talked about this actually. So I know that there's discovery, there's curiosity, and now of course there's perseverance. But you mentioned that there were five, I think you said, missions to rover missions to Mars. So Sam wants to know how many robots are they now on Mars, working or not working?
Okay, so the first one was the little Sojourner rover, which was with Mars Pathfinder, and then there was Spirit and Opportunity, the twin Mars exploration rovers, and then there was Curiosity, and Perseverance was the fifth.
Oh,
Now, those were the rover missions. There were also lander missions, which was the latest one was Insight, and then I think Phoenix was before that, and then like 2 or 3 Viking missions.
Okay.
And now we also have a Chinese lander rover combo on Mars, which is the first one sent by someone not JPL to
Got
land, and that just landed this spring also. Um, so those
it.
are the ones I remember offhand. I may be missing one or two.
And that's okay. That's great, Dr. Moran. For the audience, can you just really quickly say what's the difference between a rover mission landing and a lander landing? Because you said
Oh,
what are those two differences?
so landing, they're fairly, the main difference between a rover and a lander is that once you land, a lander stays there and a
Oh,
rover moves.
got
The landing process itself is pretty similar. I mean, it's still terror and it's still, you know, parachutes and jetpacks and very critical until you get to the surface. But the main difference is that you just have to land slightly differently for the rovers because they'll end up moving and the landers are stationary.
Got it. Great. And the last question from the audience, and this is a good one actually with what's happening in the media. Do you think the aerospace field becoming privatized is better or worse for the future? And they didn't give the name, but I can actually read it. It's from Suresh.
I think there are pros and cons to the privatization of space, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. You know, one of the benefits of the aeronautics industry when it went private was that the finding that cost benefit just enabled every private citizen to be able to have access to airplanes and be able to use it to travel such that it became a commonplace thing. You know, right now with the majority of space exploration done by governmental agencies, the benefit is that it's very altruistic in some sense, right? It's not for monetary benefit, and it creates partnerships around industry, and there's that the vision that is guiding it that has that altruistic version. But the downside is that it's limited to a set of few astronauts. You know, the privatization of space may open it up for a larger field of people, and then you're not quite sure what that might do. I mean, maybe it can take us all the way to what Star Trek envisioned, where we're traveling all over space. We don't know. So pros and cons, right? We may take our baggage with us, you know, in societal senses when with the privatization of space, but it might open possibilities, just like the internet opened up so many possibilities that we never thought of when it first did it. So
Love that. Love that answer. And for those younger folks who are thinking about this, it'll be up to you to decide how we maximize the best of both worlds, their private and public government funded space activity. With that, I want you to hold, if you don't mind, Dr. Mohan, you can unshare your screen. I just got to do some closing stuff, talk about the really fun STEAM competition that is inspired by you. So to do that, I'm going to share the screen. Again, folks, you're listening to another COSI Connects live production of the Color of Science Digital Edition. I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Swati Mohan. And let me share my screen to get to the fun part of the STEAM competition. So here we go. You can see this. All right. So as you know, we do a STEAM challenge, and August's theme. So this theme is rover on Mars. So remember, the competition is you can do any 2D, 3D, cartoon, graphic, drawing, painting, anything inspired by the rover on Mars, right? And you got to submit the photo of your art to Vanessa Bowers. Her email is vbowers@cosi.org. Please take a screenshot of this. And the deadline is September 5th. And you know, we give away great prizes. We already gave away the first round of great prizes a couple months ago. Third place, you get the COSI Connects kits. Second place, you get a really cool hologram machine. And first place, you actually get an iPad mini. So again, the theme for August is inspired by none other than Dr. Mohan. So develop your artwork on the rover on Mars, submit a photo of that. Don't submit your original art, please. Just take a picture of it or have your parents take a picture of it, submit it to vbowers@cosi.org, and you have a chance of winning a really cool prize. And I'll stop sharing now. And I just want to invite Dr. Mohan back on. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today's Color of Science show, a true inspiration, not just for girls in STEM and STEAM, though you're a true inspiration for everybody that breathes oxygen on this planet. And so thank you so much for being on the show. And I'd like to give you the last word as we close out.
I'll just say thank you so much for having me. It was a super fun discussion, and I hope it, provided some inspiration to the future generation.
You got it. Well, I can assure you, we always have countless listeners and a lot of people inspired. We'll share the transcript of the questions with you. And thanks for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Another great Thursday, the Color of Science Digital Edition. We'll catch you in September with another extraordinary guest like Dr. Mohan. Thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.